Hey everybody, Dave the Klone here, coming back to you with another installment in the 15 minutes of movie memory madness. Welcome to 2024 edition. I know last week we kind of skipped a beat a little bit with Memento, but before we go any further talking about where we did go, make sure you smash that like and subscribe and bell icon and every other thing that you're supposed to click to make sure that you get updated every time we release a new episode, because this is how we win in the future that we are now in. And on today's episode, I don't know what could be more appropriate to ring in the new year than looking at what we thought the future was going to look like way back in 1995. That's right, we're talking about the James Cameron produced, Kathryn Bigelow directed, Ralph Fiennes starring Strange Days, featuring Doors music covered by, I believe it was Prong, but with Ray Manzarek from the Doors on keyboard. Pretty awesome. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I hope you're around the water cooler for this with a damn fine cup of coffee, because this was prime in the era I remember being a teenager in. This would be 95. I would have been a sophomore in high school. Right around the time like cyberpunk was kind of rivaling steampunk for a sort of pop culture view of the future. At a time that I would like to consider still, even looking back at this movie with 2024 now eyes, I'd say it was still a little bit of naive optimism, kind of like a pre-destroyed by social media idea of the future. In fact, social media is the one thing this did not really predict, at least, I mean, in a way it did maybe. The whole idea of how we are seeing so much more information now. We could really look at maybe things like YouTube and even the body cam footage that's coming out from all the police controversies in the last decade or so, making their way onto the social airwaves. Maybe that was a little bit of the predictive programming of this particular movie. Just to kind of recap so we all know what we're talking about here. If you didn't see the movie, might be a good time to pause this and then go watch it. Or you could continue listening and watch it later. Who knows? I tend not to, well, I'm going to spoil a lot of stuff, so it is what it is. But in any case, oh yeah, I forgot Juliet Lewis and Angela Bassett and the late, great Tom Sizemore make an appearance again on the show in our 11th episode here. But yeah, so the idea of a future, and it's an interesting movie because it's like a crossroads of a few genres, and kind of apropos that James Cameron was involved. It even has that look. I don't know if it was the same DP, and I think obviously there was a romanticized connection between James Cameron and Kathryn Bigelow at some time in the past, so it made sense that they were working together. I don't know. I don't know why that's so funny. I just thought it was funny. Now I've got that nervous giggle going on. But yeah, so the idea being the movie takes place in a futurized Los Angeles on the eve of the millennium, because way back before the year 2000, everybody was sure that as the stroke of midnight hit on 2000, the whole world was going to change. And you know, it's kind of interesting how back in the day, we didn't give a very long window into the future before we thought things were going to be radically different, you know, and I remember that was sort of one of my biggest disappointments. Well, not disappointments, but sort of just like that's all that happened, like a little bit of a deflated moment when we actually did cross into the new millennium, because, you know, Back to the Future, even Aliens to a degree, everybody thought like by times that are maybe only a couple years off from where we are now, we would have the flying cars, we would have the teleportation, we would have space exploration, we'd be fighting with aliens, which, if anybody's been paying attention to the sort of social media sphere, we may have already begun those encounters. Anybody in Miami feel like commenting down at the below this video or any video on the Hollow9ine Productions YouTube channel, please feel free, or you could shoot us a note at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, the word hollow, the number 9, INE, podcast@gmail.com. We may have had an otherworldly encounter, but this movie doesn't talk about aliens so much, but it does have If you notice some of the tech in the movie, before we go into the sort of focus tech of the movie, there's the telephones everybody's got. Not necessarily video phones, but they do have a video screen which will close caption the call for you, or text out your voicemails as they're being left for you. A little bit of a precursor to the video phones we saw in the Aliens world, in the film Aliens, James Cameron's film Aliens. Seeing the connections here? Anyway, this movie deals with a guy named Lenny Nero, played by who we now call Ralph Fiennes, but even in the trailers that I was reviewing to do this podcast, they were saying Ray Fiennes, and I think this almost is a Mandela effect, because for the longest time, I thought this guy's name was Ralph Fiennes, and I think that might just be a natural auditory phenomenon of putting the word Ray and Fiennes next to each other. You think that F sound, the Ralph Fiennes, might just kind of create itself in the popular vernacular. But yeah, his name is Ralph Fiennes, and if you Google it, I even Googled it the other day, and someone had the question posted, is his name Ralph Fiennes or Ralph Fiennes? And his Wikipedia page, his IMDb page, they all say Ralph so-and-so Fiennes. Yes, I should have the page up in front of me. I don't. It's fine. Take my word for it, or go check it out yourself. But they act like it was always Ralph Fiennes. How could you have ever thought it was Ralph Fiennes? Then I'm listening to the trailer on this going, Ralph Fiennes, and I'm like, see, that's how we thought. In any case, I'm pretty sure I saw a trailer for this movie when I went to see Johnny Mnemonic, the Keanu Reeves movie, which is in a similar LA. And a lot of these LAs of the future very much harken back to sort of the Ridley Scott Blade Runner future, which is interesting to be bringing Ridley Scott up since I've already mentioned Aliens a whole bunch of times. But yeah, everybody's keeping score at home. I get it. In any case, we've got Ralph Fiennes, or as I had called him for a long time, Ralph Fiennes, as a sort of anti-hero in this futuristic cyberpunk neo-noir semi-action mystery detective movie. And he is a street hustler, but what he sells, and what was the sort of real kind of hype-up idea behind this movie, is he sells these recordings of other people's experiences that are recorded straight from your brain. Straight from the cerebral cortex, as it says in the trailer and in the film itself. When there's a great parlor scene where he's kind of pitching what he does to a potential customer, and it's a technology that was initially created for the I guess the DEA, for law enforcement. Let's just put it that way. To replace body wires, and it was a surveillance technique. It was something where someone could go in, they'd be wearing this rig on their head, so they were probably wearing it under a hat or under a wig or under some kind of, that would be the only subterfuge left, but it was sort of like a mesh, or almost like a shower cap in some ways, that would be right on your head, and it would be recording your experience right to this other device onto like a mini disc, and then someone else could replay that later and fully experience what you were going through, like you'd feel the air in the room, you'd experience all the physical contact, tastes, sounds, smells. It would almost be like you were there. So Lenny Nero, played by Ralph/Ralph Fiennes, that's how I'm gonna do it for this episode, sells these recordings on the street because they are illegal. Having the technology to play them back is illegal. This is like drugs. This is like drug dealing in the future, right before the dawn of the millennium. It harkens back to a movie from 1983 called Brainstorm, starring Christopher Walken, where they basically discovered this same type of technology. So I think by 95, maybe that had faded from the sort of popular zeitgeist. I knew about it, and it kind of harkens back to this childhood I had where, if my mom mentioned a movie, you feel like, oh, you've never heard of Brain Scan or Brainstorm, or well, what did I just say? Let's go back to Christopher Walken's. See, this I'll look up, but the other stuff I won't. Brainstorm, you know, the way she would mention it was sort of like, oh, everybody knows about this. That's how I felt about a lot of stuff when I was younger and my parents would talk about it. I always felt like I was like, oh man, I'm late to the table. The whole world knows about this thing that I'm just finding out about. And so I think that was what fueled my growing up as a movie aficionado, making sure that if I'm watching something that was contemporary to me and modern, like if I was watching Strange Days, or if I even saw the trailer for Strange Days and saw the technology there, and go, oh, that sounds like this Christopher Walken movie that my mom told me about called Brainstorm. And it's really weird. Like, I know it's part of one of the things that happens in that movie, because I only saw it once a long time ago as a kid. I know there was like sort of like the big build up towards the end of this movie from 1983 that you've had 40 years to go catch out in the world, so I am going to not feel too bad about spoiling stuff, is that Christopher Walken puts on the rig as he's dying from a heart attack. And so it was supposed to be that they were going to maybe catch or capture the experience of what death is like and see what happens when you die. Very similar also to the OA on Netflix. Check out the OA if you haven't watched it yet. It's only got 2 seasons, but supposedly there are rumblings that it will come back, or it was in the grand design for it to briefly have a pause in production and then come back later. It might even fit into the meta narrative of that show. But that show is all about a doctor who is obsessed with finding out what happens when we die. Do we go to an afterlife, and is there a way to map that out by studying people who've had near-death experiences? And he has technology meant to sort of try to record what's going on with them. Anyway, back to Strange Days. So we start out following just the sort of grandioseness and kind of cool factor of what's going on with this sort of as the nouveau riche drug dealing. There's still drugs in the future. There's still all kinds of other crime. And in fact, we're still only, at the time that this movie came out, we were only a couple of years out from the Rodney King beating in LA and the police brutality issues that arose from that. And there's even scenes in this movie that kind of play off of that and definitely sort of require that as, you know, general knowledge of what was going on in the world at the time. And I think sometimes we lose that context, especially if at the time that you're watching this thing you're either too young to understand some of those things that are going on politically in the world, or maybe they just kind of blow right by you or a little bit above your head. Being in high school at the time, we definitely, you know, I spent a couple of years from middle school up until high school talking about the incident and the implications there. So it was definitely, when I did see this movie when it was fresh, it was sort of like, oh, wow, they're really pulling that in. But what winds up happening is, as you would imagine, the technology is being used not only for these sort of nefarious narcotic type purposes, but a lot of the thrust of the story is around a friend of Lenny Nero's, a prostitute who had recorded something while she was wired with one of these rigs, and the thing she recorded was the actual murder of a very influential, popular, iconic figure in music. Very also reminiscent of kind of the end of the 90s, before gangster rap became a thing. Hip-hop used to be a very politically charged, but in a sort of more like knowledge and progress perspective than, say, gangster lifestyle perspective. And so, think like Arrested Development, and I think Me-Fi Me actually is one of the rappers on the soundtrack for this movie. The soundtrack was pretty epic too. This movie's kind of got that whole thing going on where it was like the trailer, the really kind of teaser trailer, was just Ralph Fiennes kind of giving his spiel directly to the camera. And then if you saw that trailer, and it was just a tease, and it would be saying things like he was introducing you to the concept of wire tripping and experiencing somebody else's experience, and how people who would seek him out to purchase these things, you'll wind up kind of getting to the point, and I guess this was, probably similar to some other drug type dealer type characters for people in reality, when you're sitting around doing drugs together, or kind of doing that superficial bonding you do while you're waiting to purchase the drugs. You wind up talking about yourself. You don't want to divulge too much information. You don't give them your ATM pin, but you probably tell them things that you're into or things that you like doing while you're getting high, whatever. And so this trailer, which I vividly remember like being the thing. Eventually there were more traditional trailers that came out that would kind of set the stage and talk a little bit about the actual content of the movie and what the story was. But this teaser trailer was just Lenny with a screen behind him that was divided black and white, and it was very extreme close on his face, and every once in a while it would cut to like just the left half of his face filling one side of the screen in words, and then the other side of his face, and he was kind of doing like a back and forth A-B comparison to the sort of culture of these people who would be buying these other experiences. And he would say, I'm your shrink, I'm your priest. And when he would say shrink, priest would be on the screen, and when he said priest, shrink was on the screen. And it was just things like that I'm like, oh man, I was at such an impressionable time where I wasn't fully, this is just around the time of Pulp Fiction, right? 94 was Pulp Fiction, so it was the beginning era of a new way of watching movies. It was sort of the very early stages of me beginning to follow directors and sort of following directorial styles and screenwriters and things like that. And at the time, a good buddy of mine who we went through sort of waves of friendship, but we were friends. Really, we became friends towards the end of freshman year, and sophomore year we were good friends. Even through the end of high school, we sort of petered out towards the very end of high school. We definitely lost touch when we both went to college, but at the time that this movie came out, we were hanging out a lot. We were really into Bruce Willis movies, so like 12 Monkeys is around this time, and also I think the year before this was Leon the Professional, and all these movies, like we started working out, we started studying the encyclopedia of Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and cyberpunk was kind of a thing that we were starting to gravitate to in all ways, music for sure. And definitely when we saw Johnny Mnemonic and the trailer for this movie came out, this was like one that we were like, oh man, I cannot wait for Strange Days. And then it came out, and much like with Johnny Mnemonic, it was sort of like you were amped up by the action elements of what you were expecting. I thought that his whole Lenny's dialogue delivery in that teaser, where he's kind of running down this whole thing, he's like, oh, you're a virgin brain, you've never tripped before, okay, we're gonna start you off right, I'm the guy, you just gotta talk to me, tell me what you want, tell me what you like, I'll get you what you want, I'll get you what you need. And it was sort of, but he's also got this like leather or like shark skin looking type leather Armani style jacket, he very flashy. And it was in almost also in the same time period of Hackers, where it was sort of like there was this color palette that would then be tinged with a sort of metallic shine to almost everything. And very little of that. I mean, that was the sort of, I guess, what we all expected the future to look like in the 90s. That was what the retro futuristic aesthetic that was set up in the 90s was. That has all changed so much, Hackers especially is the one that you have to bring up when you look at movies like this, because Hackers dealt with computer technology, and when you watch that one, especially now in 2024, how dated it feels, how infancy it feels, how naive it feels, whereas this movie is really working on a lot of different layers. It's not just like the futuristic stuff was really just a backdrop. Even the buying and selling of clips, as they call them, which are other people's stolen memories or experiences, which they're not always stolen. Some people will record these things for the purposes of selling them on the street. The movie opens with us watching one of these clips, and it's a bunch of people pulling off an armed robbery, and one of the characters actually winds up dying. The character who's recording it falls off of a roof, and then we pop into the real reality, and Lenny like pulls the rig off and he's like, oh man, you should have warned me the guy was gonna die. And then you start to get into the idea of like, you know, sometimes these things come out of like the police evidence room or come through nefarious sources. And then later we see him reviewing a clip, and it's these two women actually having sex, and we cut to him in the bar, and it's like the two women and their one's boyfriend, and they obviously filmed it for the purposes of selling it on the street. So it's this interesting, almost odd that this would be made illegal, but you could kind of see the implications of like everybody kind of using this technology. And it really comes to bear when you wind up seeing the sort of political implications of this murder and how the police, and this was a race relations in America type movie at the time as well. And so again, era of Rodney King. This too, and I have to credit a video I watched on YouTube. It was the birthday, like movie birthdays, I think it's called, where this guy was talking about how, if you watched it, I think he watched it in 2020. Let me find the video so I can give this guy credit, because it was a great video. Yeah, Movie Birthdays is the channel, and it was the Strange Days at 25 Neon Noir 25th anniversary video. You know, the way it sort of dances around the idea that, like, okay, these racist cops pulled over this African-American rap star icon, who, you know, in the movie you hear through all this other kind of background diegetic TV, you know, broadcasts that are coming through every once in a while, interrupting people's conversations, or characters will sit at a bar, order a drink, and then look up at the TV, and the TV will be broadcasting the news story about how this guy was found murdered. The police are investigating, but nobody knows that the police did it, and that he was causing a big stir in the city because he was organizing a lot of community groups to put pressure on the city to do something about police brutality and the way that the sort of police state surrounding the African American community. So, you know, the stage is being set, and then when you finally do see the clip that this character Iris, ironic because a lot of this movie is all about eyes and vision and seeing things the way other people see them and putting yourself in other people's perspectives. So Iris was the one who captured this and then escaped from the situation, and the cops are chasing her, and she's trying to tell Lenny that she needs help, and Lenny doesn't want to talk to her because he's just trying to make his hustle. And he also, there's a really, you know, so for me, anyone who's been following any of my other podcasts, like the Feeling It, a Diary of Recovery podcast, where I talk about not only recovery from substance use, but recovering from an abusive relationship with a malignant narcissist. That said, there is a lot of the sort of unhealthy practices and toxicity that we see with Lenny's character, because he has all of these clips of experiences with his ex-girlfriend, played by Juliet Lewis, and she's now a rising star musician named Faith, and she's with the same label that Jericho One, the artist who was murdered by the police, was on. And so we see Lenny watching and re-experiencing a lot of these moments. And so anyone who's been through a really heavy or traumatic breakup can understand that. In fact, there were times during my last breakup, and I mean, I've had a couple breakups in my life since this movie came out, where you kind of would stop and think to yourself, it's the equivalent, the closest thing we have to it is when you like look through pictures you should have deleted off your phone, or if you have any, you know, voicemails from them that you didn't delete. Think about like Jesse's character in Breaking Bad after Jane dies, and he keeps calling her phone just to hear her outgoing voice message greeting. Except not only it's very surface, you know what I mean? It's very tactile, these things. Like looking at a picture, your brain is doing all this work to remember things. Well, this is like you press play, you put a disc in a drive, you press play, and you're actually reliving those moments. It's actually, from all the sort of psychology that has come and gone since this movie has been made, especially a lot of the healing space, dealing with people who've been affected by narcissism and narcissists and the sort of really epic levels of toxicity that come in those relationships. What we see Lenny doing in this movie is beyond obsessive and unhealthy, and it actually is fueling a lot of his kind of reluctance to become the protagonist of the film. And they call it doing too much playback. Any characters in the movie who are too addicted to reliving experiences or living experiences that aren't their own, they say you're doing too much playback, and it does start to affect your neurological response to the world around you and the way you interact with the world around you. Michael Wincott plays the record producer of both Faith and Jericho 1, and at one point we see him playing guitar in his apartment, and he's got the rig on. So, that as a musician as well, having, over 2 decades of experience as a bass player, a little rusty these days. I wish I could have some recordings from back when I was playing all the time that I could just kind of re-download, almost Matrix style, give me a flight program for helicopter, give me my early days of when I was really good at bass, and so in some ways you kind of see how these things would not only be addictive but useful, and it's interesting, and I kind of, it's one of those technologies that in the back of my mind it's been floating around that I'm like, I'm sure they probably really have this, the shadow government or whoever it is that knows whether or not it was really an alien at the Miami Mall last weekend. They probably have stuff like this, and who knows? It'd be nice if we could just stumble upon it, and but at the same time, it's one of the messages. Angela Bassett's character, she plays Mace, who's Lenny's friend. She's a limo driver, and they met because Lenny used to be a cop, and her husband was arrested for drug dealing, and Lenny was one of the detectives who was there on that day, and he was kind of keeping her son in a different room and distracted, so he didn't realize what was going on, and so they became good friends. And she says to him, memories are designed to fade. That's how we heal and move on and grow, and they fade for a reason. So for him to be constantly reliving moments with somebody that he's still in love with who doesn't love him anymore is not healthy. So she's kind of the voice of reason. She's the moral compass of the movie. We've also got Tom Sizemore running around with long hair, kind of around the same time, I would say, like Interview with a Vampire, which came out in 94, made guys want to have long. I mean, I know I'm saying that from personal experience. That's what made me start growing out my hair in high school. So that by the time I got to college, I had long hair. But and I was, got really deft at putting my hair in a ponytail and things like that. But it was funny to see it on Tom Sizemore for some reason, and it also fuels why I think I actually may have met Tom Sizemore in real life, because I went to France in 1998. It was part of my girlfriend at the time's graduation present from her parents, and when we were at the Eiffel Tower, in the elevator coming down from the tower, there is a guy over in the corner who I didn't notice, but I noticed when he was starting to talk and speak loudly, and he was speaking English to the people that he was with, who were speaking French back to him. And he's looking, when I hear the English, I look over and he's looking at me, and he says, "Excuse me, are you and your girlfriend American?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, because my cousin's over here, so they can always spot Americans, like, from, across the room." And I was like, "Has anyone ever told you look exactly like Tom Sizemore?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, who's that?" I'm like, "He's an actor in America." And they're like, "Oh, what's he been in?" And I was like, "Well, I know him as Sly Del Vecchio from Passenger 57, and he was also in this movie Strange Days." And he looks at me and goes, "Was he the sick cop in Natural Born Killers?" And I'm like, "Yes, Seymour Scagnetti, absolutely." And he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not him." I'm like, "All right, what's your name?" He says, "Christian Lamont," which totally felt like a made-up fake name. And when we got off the elevator, because I don't know if you've never been to the Eiffel Tower, there's an elevator that takes you up to the top where you can do your observation from the top of the Eiffel Tower, and then you take the elevator back down. It takes like 10-15 minutes. And as we're starting to walk away, he's like, "Hey guys, come here." And he's like, "Let's take a picture." And my girlfriend and I, and I'm so pissed because this was obviously the days way before phones with cameras. We didn't even have cell phones at that time, but we took the picture with my girlfriend at the time's camera, and she subsequently, who knows, destroyed the footage. I don't know. I mean, we broke up at the end of that summer when we both went off to different colleges, but you know, and he says, come on, let's go take a picture. And he turns to his cousins and he says, come on, une photo avec les Américains. And it was like one of those, like, you're speaking French with such an American accent. And I'm like, who wouldn't, you know, like why would he ask us to take a picture with him? You know what I mean? I don't know. It just felt like something that you would do if you were running into a celebrity. You know what I mean? So that's my I'm sure I met Tom Sizemore, and it's almost more heartbreaking now that he's passed away, especially because when he passed away last year, I believe in 2023, last year, it was a few months after I was supposed to meet him at the New Jersey HorrorCon and Film Festival in Atlantic City, New Jersey, except that he kind of blew the festival off. He missed his flight, didn't feel like getting on a flight the next day. And I was really upset because it was going to be the first time I was going to be able to directly ask him, like, hey, did I meet you in France in 1998 when the French team was winning the World Cup? And I didn't get to, because between missing that flight and not appearing at that conference or convention, a few months later he had his stroke and then subsequently passed away not long after that. So this is one of those things that just kind of passes on into legend. I almost wish I had the technology from Strange Days to have been recording the experience to be able to, like, you know, let's go check the footage. But it's one of those things almost like ironic that we just recently spoke about Memento, because one of the things Lenny in that movie, I did not know it was 2 Lenny movies back to back. Look at that. Look at what just happens sometimes on this podcast. The movie madness. He says that memory can change the size and color of a room, can change the color of a car. Our memories are fallible. Our memories are malleable. Our memories become less reliable, especially when you consider that people are, you know, go to court to give their eyewitness account, and their memory can be affected even by the way questions are asked. So to have the concept of a thing that would be able to preserve not only your memory but your, like, the total experience, like, imagine what it would be like for me to be able to put on this, like, rig on my head and play back this disc and feel what the humidity was like in France in 1998 in Paris, and what it sounded like in that elevator with all the other people around us, and just the sound of this dude's voice, and, you know, feeling my arm around my girlfriend at the time, and then him saying, hey, come on, let's take a photo, and being like, yeah, sure, why the hell not? You know what I mean? And it was like, it's just one of those things, and anytime I see a movie with Tom Sizemore now, I think about, oh, that's cool that I met him before I was into meeting celebrities. You know, it's nice to have had that. That's one I would keep, even if I was one of those people like Lenny Nero in this movie, Ralph/Ray Fiennes, who was a little too obsessed with playing back experiences that already happened, not letting go of the past, and eventually having to throw my discs away. That would be one I would keep. You know, I'd be like, yeah, let's just keep this one in the vault, because that's like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. In any case, the movie becomes very much a film noir set in a cyberpunk setting of him trying to figure out not only, I missed a whole bunch of stuff about the movie going off on that Tom Sizemore thing. So there's a serial killer who winds up catching up with Iris after she leaves the tape for Lenny to see the murder happen. And this serial killer is taunting Lenny by leaving him tapes, not only the tape of killing Iris, but then a tape of breaking into Lenny's apartment while he's asleep, footage of him seeing Lenny, watching Lenny sleep, like holding a knife to his throat, you know, all these things where, you know, the psychology behind that, like, what would you do, almost like Lost Highway, you know, what would you do if somebody dropped off a tape and you're watching the tape and it's of them breaking into the house and watching you sleep? Every once in a while there'll be articles on social media of 16 and most horrifying phenomenon, and someone says, I was going through photos on my phone and all of a sudden there was a photo in there from the night before and it was of me sleeping and I didn't take it and I was alone. You know what I mean? So what an interesting world it is, and what an interesting, I don't know, what an interesting world it could be if some of these things had come to pass. But in any case, I think Strange Days, at the time it came out, it was a much cooler movie, and I definitely also did not have that experience of having a partner or a girlfriend, because I obviously it came out before I started seeing the girlfriend that I went to France with was my first girlfriend, and so not really being able to identify with the character and having that sort of obsession over a love lost, you know, to the point where you would just constantly keep reliving the good moments. Like we see him in the beginning of the movie get back to his apartment, and as he sits back with a drink, puts on the rig, and he plays back a time that they were rollerblading together at the Venice Beach boardwalk, and then go back to his apartment and have sex, you know. And it's like, obviously I can understand it from a story perspective, but not having experienced that kind of loss and those kinds of recurring, I mean, oftentimes when you're in a breakup and you have to get over somebody, those thoughts are intrusive. Those types of memories are intrusive, and here's somebody who's addicted to reliving those memories. And so to think about the context of other people out there seeking out all these experiences that they can't have. Now, there was a cool thing that happened in the movie where one of his sources of these clips is a guy in a wheelchair, who you'll notice from the James Cameron film The Abyss. He's the guy who had the rat on his shoulder. I've already done my IMDbing for this episode. I'm not going to go back to it, but you know who I'm talking about. And he's in a wheelchair, and Lenny drops him off because it's New Year's. That's the other big reason that we're doing this in the beginning of 2024, because it was a New Year's Eve movie set going into the year 2000, made in 1995. Here we are in 2024 going, man, I miss Y2K. I miss this future that we thought it was going to be. And he gives him this clip, and when the guy puts the rig on and watches it, it's a dude running down the beach and making sure to look down at his legs so that he sees his legs running, and then he looks up and there's this woman jogging towards him on the beach, and as they pass, you know, they flirt a little bit. And this guy, you know, you could just see the elation on his face of being able to experience walking and running again, especially of all the places at the beach with a beautiful woman. And so, you know, there are these kind of things where it's like there's two sides to the coin. It's not all good, it's not all bad, and especially if it was able to expose these guys who tried to cover up murdering a politically controversial artist, it makes sure that there's a conversation, as opposed to just making a blanket general, this is all horrible and has to be outlawed. In fact, the way they catch the guys, spoiler alert, played by William Fichtner and Vincent D'Onofrio, at a time when they were not as much the household names that they shortly thereafter became, as the cops who committed the murder. The only way they were caught was when the police commissioner was approached by Angela Bassett at the New Year's Eve big gala and said, I have a tape that you have to watch. And he, you know, first says, because it's New Year's, I'm not going to have you arrested, but you know that that's illegal, get away from me. And she like leaves it for him, and then he comes out and he confronts the cops and he holds up the disc. So, you know, even he had to kind of open himself up to the idea of like, well, let me see what this is all about. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost kind of looking at the super conservative politicians who deem things evil before they even know what they're talking about. So, and anyway, in any case, Strange Days. This was a strange episode for a strange Dave. So, hope you're enjoying what you're hearing. Hope you're enjoying the series. Man, we ran long on this one, longest episode yet. All about memory. In any case, hope you're enjoying. Hope you are enjoying your water cooler water and a damn fine cup of coffee as you engage in conversations just like this with your friends and colleagues, and enjoy your own 15 minutes of movie memory madness. Please feel free to join the conversation. Hit us up at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Comment below. Share the video with folks that you know who would like it. And I'll be back next time to see you at the movies.
You've been listening to the Hollow9ine Network, bringing you the very best in fan-made media. That's the word hollow, the number 9, I-N-E. Find the Hollow9ine Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Email us at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Leave us your feedback. Join in the conversation and be a part of the action. Join in the fun. Hollow9ine.